Hey everyone, this is Megan Hillier from Know Your Ancestors, and you're listening to the Know Your Ancestors podcast. Many of us have an innate desire to understand our roots, to know where we come from, and to understand the lives of our ancestors. On the show, I sit down with content creators and entrepreneurs to share some of the stories that I've uncovered and compiled about their own ancestors. Watch and listen as we discuss the traumatic and life-changing events of their close ancestors that helped shape who these guests are today. Welcome to the podcast today. I'm here with Monica Packer, and I'm so excited to talk to her. First, we're going to talk a bit about her and her work, and then I'm going to share with her what I have found about some of her ancestors. So before we get started with that, Monica, can you just introduce yourself to let people know that maybe don't know you yet, a bit about you, your family, and your work?
Yes, people primarily know me as a podcaster. So I have a podcast called About Progress, where we are about progress being practical. We focus on all things personal development outside of perfectionism, which also relates to why I even started my show and my own path to finding ways to grow outside of the all or nothing pendulum swing I'd been on my whole life. And I'm also a mom of five. I'm primarily a stay-at-home mom. I work during nap time and bedtime, and when my husband's able to help out too, which is really great. And yeah, I think anything else I could say is we live in the Salt Lake area and we're really loving the mountains here and getting to learn how to ski and gardening and all that good stuff.
Nice. Awesome. And I've loved your podcast. I've been following you for a while on Instagram, and I love just the message that you share with women. I think there's a lot of pressure on women to hmm, be perfect, to look perfect, to put on this, this idea of the perfect mother, the perfect wife, and raising our children the right way or whatever. And I like your message of progress over perfection, and that looks different for everyone.
Mhm.
With this being a podcast about our ancestors, I would love to talk to you a bit about maybe the women that you in your family, like that need for perfection. Was that something that you saw, kind of emulated growing up with your mother, aunts, grandparents, that sort of thing? Or talk to me a bit about kind of your beginnings of this idea of progress over perfection.
I don't feel like I had this transparent thing going on with the women in my family in terms of being like, in order to be a good person, you have to do these things, you have to look this way. I don't think that was how I was raised, which is, I'm really lucky that way. I know a lot of people are raised with, their own version of a helicopter parent, someone who is really anxious about you achieving and always looking perfect and performing to this level so that they look good. And I feel really fortunate because I didn't have that with my parents. They weren't pushing me to succeed or be or look perfect. And I really do appreciate that. One thing my parents said a lot was, we don't care what grades you get, we just care that you tried. So it was less about, I feel like, it being modeled for me or pushed on me in more of a way that I noticed I could feel good about myself and that I could also get praise from others and be seen as good from others. And it happened so gradually, especially over my youth, that I wouldn't say it was something that was super modeled to me. Now, I would say there's like one exception. And I think this is really true for those who are from our parents and our grandparents' generations, as well as our faith background. I felt like this
Mhm.
is especially common with women in the LDS faith, of they're still being more focused on appearance and size. And that was definitely apparent
Mhm.
in my families of origin. And I say families, I mean in plural, like, probably both sides of grandparents and my immediate family too. And, that's something that's kind of tricky to talk about because
Mhm.
I think it was so part of the culture and so part of where women got their value. I'm thinking especially of my grandparents and my grandmas, these women who, they're from the greatest generation. They dealt with so much terrible, hard things and so many restrictions. And I think a way that women could in some ways get ahead in some ways in society was by looking certain ways. So,
Mhm.
I did have one of my grandmas that was always on a diet and always talking about her size. I mean, until the very bitter end, you know?
Mm.
And I wouldn't say her end was bitter. I just mean it's sad to me that it's
Yes.
like that's sad. Like till the very
That was a
end, you're
struggle her whole life. Yeah,
yeah, her
that's
whole life
mhm.
always worrying about weight. My dad actually told me a story about my great aunts who I never met. And it wasn't because they died. I actually thought they did. I never really met them. I knew all of my grandpa's brothers. He was very close with his brothers. They were always a part of our lives. We did tons of gatherings as families with his brothers, never his sisters. And I was actually talking to my dad about that this summer. Like, why did I never know grandpa's sisters? And he said something like, "Oh, that's really fascinating to me, but so sad too that his sisters were heavy-set women and their mom, so my great-great-grandma, was always on them about that.
Oh wow.
And because of that, they had really terrible self-esteem
Mm.
and they married men that reflected that kind of self-esteem and they kind of drifted away from the family. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's just so sad that that's like the
Mm.
reason why. So I would say it's tricky to talk about, but I also think I'm not unusual for having that
Yes.
in our backgrounds and our stories, especially of the generations that they
Hmm.
were raised in.
Hmm. I think that's a super common thing. And I think a lot of us in our generation now are working to change that narrative around body image or whatever, like that that doesn't need to be something that ruins relationships. Like that's
Yes.
heartbreaking that people cared so much that they would, care about that more than a relationship with their child, which
Hmm.
is
And I'm
hard.
sure there's more to that that I don't, that I know, but at least they lost their relationship with their great nieces and nephews. And again, we are so
Mhm.
close. It's just, yeah, it's pretty sad.
Mhm. Yeah. So, why do you think you talked about that you kind of had a desire for perfection and your kind of journey with that? Can you speak a bit of how this idea of progress over perfection, how that has helped you in setting goals, in creating habits, and all of that sort of thing?
Hmm. So we talked a little bit about my own history, just of it trickling into my life, this perfectionism model. I feel like it really took hold of my life, especially in my late teens and early adulthood years, especially college. It started more appearance based about, wanting to look really good. And then it became like about grades and extracurricular and also like my uber righteousness and all
Mhm.
that. And I really crashed and burned as a young adult. I almost lost my life to perfectionism. And I really mean that. That's not hyperbole.
Mhm.
I faced multiple eating disorders and with them, very significant and dangerous mental health issues, including suicidal ideation. And in working on my recovery from the eating disorders, I kind of went to this other form of perfectionism that people don't even think is perfectionism. And that's the underachieving kind, where I stayed stuck in the nothing side of that pendulum swing. I had done all so well for so long until I paid the price that I could no
Mhm.
longer pay. So I went to the nothing side. And 10 years later, I found I was still paying a price.
Mhm.
And the results pretty much looked the same. I was unfulfilled. I was anxious. I was depressed. I was also like angry. And I'm not really an angry person. I mean, I wouldn't say that was an innate part of my personality, but it really forced me to take a look at my relationship with myself and how I base my identity off of my outcomes, whether they are there and they're really good or they're not at all. And that
Mhm.
no matter what, I was still on a hamster wheel of trying to figure out who I was outside of those outcomes. And I kind of had this light bulb moment where I realized that all or nothing cycle was not getting me anywhere. It was actually hurting more than helping. And instead, I wanted to learn how to do something to try to grow outside of perfectionism, to even see if it was possible. And I mean, to fast forward many years, it's turned into quite a long experiment. I think we're now into almost 8.5 years of this experiment. I can say with full confidence that not only do you grow when you choose to do something, not all or nothing, when you choose to believe that small wins build over time, when you lean into the process of messy growth, not only do you grow exponentially more than
Mhm.
when you're on either side of that all or nothing model. And I feel that I have. And I think that desire for perfectionism started with good intentions. I've always wanted to better myself. I often joke with my husband, like, I'm like Alexander Hamilton, I'm never satisfied. And I think that can be for good or for worse. It
Mm-hmm.
can turn into a bad side. I have to always watch that with myself and my husband and my kids. Like, where am I putting the line? But that desire to grow has always been there. So it's
Mm-hmm.
been more about how to do so in ways that I feel like I am in alignment with who I am, regardless of my outcomes. That failure is
Mm-hmm.
part of the plan. It's not something to try to skip over or hustle away from or avoid altogether. And so it's changed every part of my life, really.
Mm-hmm. I love that you talked about that you kind of swung to the other side of doing nothing. And I
Hmm.
see that there's been times in my life where it feels safer to like just not
Yeah,
try. Like,
it
and
does.
how that is a form of perfectionism because if you don't try, there's no failure,
That's
right?
right.
There's no imperfection, I guess. It's just a lack of anything. And I can see in my own life sometimes that black and white, like, well, I'm going to try this thing, but if I don't do it perfect, then it's like, oh, well, I'll just
Yeah.
give up. I'm just not going to do that anymore. So I
Hmm.
love that you talk about that. And I know that you are actually, when this podcast comes out, which is just next week, you are enrolling for your Sticky Habits Intensive, where you talk all about this sort of thing, about how to create habits that stick, that are not all or nothing. So if anyone's interested in that, we'll share information about that at the end. But I just love that message. And I
Thanks.
think that it gets kind of glossed over. I think it's not a sexy thing, right? It's not like in 30 days your life will be transformed if you
Yeah.
stick to this method, like it's not a flashy thing, but that's how true progress happens. So
You
I
know,
love that.
you're hitting on something that I literally just wrote some copy for marketing next week about that.
No.
Like how like what I sell is not very sellable.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in your words sexy. It's not like here is 100% black and white certainty, a step-by-step
Mm-hmm.
program that you follow and then you're done.
Right.
And I think I really believe people who sell those things are lying.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
really, it may work for some time, but there's always a price being
Yeah.
paid. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's a whole larger conversation to
Yeah.
have, but
Yeah.
that's a sticking point I have with the personal development world of how much
Yeah.
it thrives in prescriptions and certainty. And I
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like instead of women trying to seek out prescriptions, they need to learn how to make their own. And that's harder to sell, but it's something
It's
that I
real.
feel
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like
Yeah.
I can have integrity behind
Right.
helping them do
Yeah.
that.
Well, I love that. And I think when we do look at our ancestors' life, especially women, they were made to be small. Like
Mm,
they did not have a voice. They
yes.
weren't able to change the world. There was a select few that, brought about change, but the majority of the women in history have just been silent and been unable to speak their voice. And so I think I'm getting emotional already. Okay. I think seeing you, I'm sure you have women in your family tree, your ancestors that are so proud of what you're doing and the work that you're doing for women. So
Oh, thank you.
anyway,
I think we'll just both cry.
normally I save the
I
tears for the
so
end, but
hope
here we
so. I
go.
so hope so.
Yeah, I think it's powerful stuff. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll get started sharing about what I put together about
Yeah,
your
I've been
ancestors
so
here.
excited. Yeah.
Um, when we talked, you said that you wanted to learn about a specific, well, there was a couple people that you told me about, but I kind of focused in on your your second great grandmother, Lucy Rose Eyman. I don't even know how to say her last name. Do you know how to say that?
I don't either. I don't
Okay.
either.
I'm like, it's Ehmann. So Amen, Emin.
I
I'm not
yes,
even
I
sure.
don't even know. I don't
Let's
even
just
know.
go with Amen. Okay. We'll
Sounds
do
good.
that. Okay. So I'm just going to share my screen here and then we'll get started. All right. Can you
So
see
this is
that there?
my dad's mother's side.
Yes. So
Yeah.
this,
Okay.
yes, your dad's mother's side. Yes. So
Hmm.
this is Lucy Rose Iman here. This is this girl here. She was born in March 1886 in Illinois. And this is her brother Charles. And this is probably about when she was 5 or 6 years old. I just love this picture of her. Not many people have that old of pictures of
Yeah.
their family. So she was the oldest child born to Gustav and Rosina Eymann. Here's her with a couple of her younger siblings again. And Gustav and Rosina, they both immigrated to the US from Germany sometime in the early 1880s. I think they came separately because they married here in the United States and they resided in Wheatland, Will County, Illinois at the time of their marriage. So it's just kind of a suburb almost of Chicago there. I'm not sure what it was like when they immigrated there in the 1880s, but it's probably a small farming community. And here they are, Gustav and Rosina. According to census records, their daughter Lucy was born in March 1886, 3 months before they were married. But I wasn't able to verify her birth record, but they were married according to census then 3 months after she was born. So Gustav was 25 years old and a farmer, and Rosina was 20 years old when they were married. So you can see here's Gustav Eymann. He's a farmer, 25 years old, and it says where he was from, not sure how to say that, Bredock,
Mm.
Woonberg. Anyways,
Looks,
not going to try to
yeah,
pronounce
I don't
those.
know. That's definitely German.
But they are both from the same, maybe that's a county, Woonberg. I'm not sure. So they
Okay.
might have known each other beforehand. I'm not sure. But they had immigrated like probably, it kind of varied on censuses. It said like 1884, 1885. So just like a year or two before they were married. But there's their marriage record.
That's really cool to see that.
Yeah. So then Gustav and Rosina had 4 children. So Lucy was the oldest, then Charles and Amelia. They were all born when they were living in Illinois up here. And they lived in Illinois for about 15 years, it seems. And then they went down here to West Plains, Missouri. And they had a son, Walter, was born there. In Family Search, someone had written that they attempted to homestead there, but the land was not favorable. So they went more west to Gage, Oklahoma, and eventually settled there and had land there. So here is a picture of that family. So here's Gustav and his wife, Rosina, and Lucy, Charles, Amelia, and Walter. And we'll talk a little bit more about these two in a little bit. So here's
Okay.
Robert Fish was Lucy's husband, and Sue was Lucy's daughter. Sue is your great grandmother. So when Sue got married, you can see that when she listed the name of her father and mother, she actually listed her grandfather as her father, Gustav Eymann there.
Hmm.
And her mother, Lucy Fair, is what she wrote, but Fair is not not what
Oh,
her name was. So when we talked, you did explain that there was a bit of a story about Susie's father. You said that her father was a man named Fred Barnes. So this is a record that was in Family Search attached to Susie, and it's this court document that is from Lucy's brother Charles, so Sue's uncle, that says that Susie's father was a man named Fred Barnes. And this was not created till 1959. So this was far after Susie had been married. So I'm not sure exactly what the motivation was for that
hmm.
to write this out, but says that let's just read some of it here. So it says, I, Charles Eymann, being first duly sworn on oath, deposes and says that I am the uncle of Susie Eymann Manning and that she was born of Fred Barnes, her father, and Lucy Rose Eymann, her mother, on August 30th, 1904, and was raised by her grandfather, Gustav Eymann, and grandmother Rose Eymann from her 13th birthday. Okay, so, and you said something about your uncle going to travel out there to see if he could find something out about this Fred Barnes.
Hmm.
How much do you know about
Well,
that information?
so they had my dad's family typically get together on Christmas Eve. And one of those Christmas Eves, and I feel like this was now several years ago, but I had been married and I already had kids, so it wasn't that long ago. He explained how they went back and tried to find some things, and they couldn't find too much. But what they feel like happened is that Fred perhaps raped Lucy.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some court documents I think they found where I think the judge was trying to order him to marry her and she was refusing. From what I thought
Right. That was the
I heard.
story. Yeah. Yeah.
So but I mean, they were, I think they were trying to read between the lines of what the
Mhm.
documents were, and so nothing was certain, and they couldn't really find much more.
Mm. Yeah. So I tried to locate any sort of court document, but I couldn't. A lot of those are held like at the county level and aren't necessarily online.
Yeah,
They weren't
maybe
put
that's
on
when they
family
went back
search or your
there.
family. Yeah. So they might have found
Okay,
that, but haven't put it anywhere. So
sure.
from what I did, I just did my best to see if I could find a Fred Barnes that might have been living near Lucy and been, of an age to be able to be Susie's father. So I located two different Fred Barneses that could be possibilities, but again, it could be
Yeah.
anyone, right? People travel, we don't know. But here is the first possible Fred Barnes. So Lucy's youngest brother, Walter, was born when they were living at White Church, Missouri. Okay, when they lived there just for a little bit near West Plains. He listed his birth location as White Church, Missouri on his World War II draft registration. So this is just north of West Plains, Missouri. So he was born in September 1903. Okay. And then Lucy's daughter, Susie, was born 11 months later on the 30th of August, 1904, in Gage, Oklahoma. They had moved to Oklahoma by then.
Hmm.
So that's just 11 months before she was born, right? So I feel like it was likely that they were living in this white church, like near West Plains, Missouri, at the time of her conception. But again, we don't know for sure. They could have even been traveling along. We don't know. But this Fred Barnes was living in Sherrill, Texas County, Missouri. It's about 60 miles from Lucy's family in 1900. So here he is, this Fred Barnes, the son of James M. Barnes and Athelia Barnes. So he was living just a bit north of where they would have been in 1900 and again in 1910. So here he is. He's married now in 1910 and has a child there. Had been married for 2 years, so from 1908. So he would have been almost 22 years old at the time of that relationship with Lucy, if this is the right Fred Barnes. Now, this is the only Fred Barnes born between 1850 and 1890, living in the county of Howell, which is where White Church is, or any of the neighboring counties. So, if Lucy's family was here during that time, this is the Fred Barnes that I would think was most likely the right Fred
Yeah.
Barnes.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, again, not totally sure what happened there. So, Gustav Ehmann, Lucy's father, sold his land in May 1904. Um, this was just a little clipping from the newspaper. So he sold all of it except for 10 acres. I'm not sure why he kept 10 acres, or maybe he gave that land to someone else. I'm not sure. But that was in May 1904. So I don't know, was this when they left in May 1904, or did they leave before and then sell the land later? We don't know for sure. But I thought that was interesting that they didn't sell their land until May 1904. So in my mind, that's probably when they left. But we don't know for
And
sure again. We don't
when
know.
did you say Susie was born? Was it
Susie was born in
1904?
August 1904. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So all we know for sure is that they were in West Plains, Missouri in 1903 when their son was born. And then they left to Gage, Oklahoma sometime before August 1904. So there's an 11-month time period in there that we don't know for sure when they left. One story that I think could be plausible is that they were in West Plains, found out she was pregnant. Maybe it was a poor circumstance, like you said, a rape or whatever, when decided to leave.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
feel like that's a totally plausible thing that could have happened.
Hmm.
So they ended up living in Gage, Oklahoma, which was quite far. Like that was quite a
Yes.
journey from by Chicago all the way down to Missouri and then all the way over to Western Oklahoma. So this is the section of land that Lucy's father Gustav obtained in 1907 in Ellis County, Oklahoma, near Gage, where they would have settled. So he could have been living here for years before that land patent was approved. Normally it didn't, it took a couple of years of them living there before they would obtain it, but he had 160 acres here total. You can see that there's still a couple houses on that land. I'm not sure if those would have been the original ones that they would have lived in. But then Lucy's daughter Susie was born again in August 1904 in Gage, Ellis County. So they came here sometime between that September 1903 and August 1904. So here in near Gage, there's another possible Fred Barnes. Again, I think it's pretty unlikely that they would have gotten all the way over to Gage within the 2 months after their youngest son was born, but it's possible. But here's a family with a son named James F. Barnes, who I found to be James Frederick Barnes, living near Lucy's parents in the 1910 census. So that's on page 14 of 17 near Gage, Oklahoma. And then parents were listed on the next page on page 15. So this Barnes family was living very close to Gustav and Rosina's family. By this time in 1910, Lucy was married, but this family could have been living near them for years. We don't know.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
again, this is the only Fred Barnes that lived near this family in 1910 in that county that would have been the same age. So we don't know for sure who that Fred Barnes is. So here's that family of that second Fred Barnes. Here's James and William and Sarah Barnes, and then their son James Frederick would have been one of these oldest four. I'm not sure which one, but if you want to know which of these Fred Barnes it is, if it was even either of these, it would be great to get DNA, like an ancestry DNA test done. And then if you matched with any of the descendants of these Fred Barneses, that would show that, yes, this is the right Fred Barnes, right? But again, that's a research job for another time.
Sure.
And
No,
you might want to explore that if that's something that's important to you. But what do you think about these two possibilities?
I think they seem very likely. I'm so impressed by your detective work. It's really something. I feel like I would need to just talk to my uncle to say, like, what, tell me more about that trial
Right.
and what county you were in, and maybe that would
Mm-hmm.
help,
Yeah.
show
Yeah.
which one
See
it
which one
likely
lines up.
is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's something, I mean, once I got digging into that, I was like, oh, I want to find out more. And, but
Yeah,
I had
I
to
do
stop.
too.
But
And
yeah, that's
so
why, yeah.
we know I'm getting their names mixed up. Like I wrote down notes so I could keep
Oh,
track
you're
of who's
good.
who, but
Yeah.
like
I'll send this all to you too. So, but
great. I would really appreciate it. I'm sure my family would too. So Lucy had Susie,
yeah.
and then Lucy got married to a
Yes.
different guy,
Yes. So we'll talk about
obviously.
that. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Yes. So Lucy, I think that's on the next slide. Yes. Okay. So then in December 27th, 1906, Lucy married Robert Fish. So you can see she was only 20 years old and he was 31.
Hmm.
And Susie, her daughter, would have been about 2 years old by then, almost two and a half. So
Okay.
here's that same photo. So here's Robert Fish. This is who Lucy married.
Hmm.
Um, and then their son Wiley was born in 1910. So this photo was taken sometime between when they got married in 1906 and then 1910. Could have been even at their wedding. I don't know. Does she look like she's two? She looks a little older than two there, but so
She
here's
maybe
Susie
looks a
down here
little
in the
older.
corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Robert Fish was a farmer. They were living in the Elmwood Township in Beaver County, Oklahoma in 1910. So if in this census, this is the column that tells if they're married, divorced, or single. And in the 1910 census, it tells you what marriage number it is. So you can see that this is actually Robert's second marriage, the M2 there, and then Lucy's first marriage. On Family Search, we don't have his first marriage there listed. So I tried to find a marriage record quickly, but I couldn't find anything. So that's another research thing
Hmm.
if that's something you want to dive into. But he's not Susie's biological father, so I'm not sure how much you care about his first marriage, anyways. But I thought it was interesting that he had been married before he was married to Lucy. Um, So by this time in this census, they'd been married for 4 years and had a son together. You can see he's listed as baby unnamed below here, but he was eventually named Wiley. So that's him there. So Susie was 6 years old in this census. So here's land that Robert Fish obtained in at Beaver County, Oklahoma. So this is kind of the section. It says that he got lots 1 and 2, and then the east half of the northwest quarter. So this whole quarter section here is the land that he had, which was, it says 155 and 1900ths acres. So pretty much 160 acres. I'm not sure why it
Yeah.
wasn't officially 160, but
Yeah.
and then this is where that land would be. So this quarter section up here, this is the whole section. So this is Oklahoma. So it's just like right in this little part here, just north of the Texas border. So Lucy and Robert would have lived here on this farm, living a typical farm life. And I'm sure it was quite desolate land out there in Oklahoma. And then here in 1918, this is when Lucy died. This is
Mm.
a death notice in the newspaper. This was on her profile on Family Search as well. She died when she was 32 years old. Can you just read this notice, starting with
Yeah.
Mrs. R.E. Fish?
Yeah. Mrs. R.E. Fish of Elmwood died at her home, 18 miles southwest of Beaver, Friday, September 13th, death being due to a general breakdown. She leaves a husband and 2 children, mother, father, 2 brothers, and 1 sister, besides numerous friends who sympathize with the bereaved.
Yeah,
Wonder what that means.
I know. Me too.
I wonder, yeah, does that mean, I mean, did she die by suicide or
Right. I'm
did
not
she
sure.
like,
And
yeah.
that's what I wanted to find out. Unfortunately, Oklahoma Vital Records, I even tried to order it,
Oh, wow.
but you have to, I think you could order it because I think you have
Mm,
to be a relative, and it's on vitalcheck.com. So I found the index of it. So it does have record that she did die, Lucy Fish, in Beaver County on September 14th, 1918. It, I even like went through to order it, but then I had to like submit my identification and things. And so I think you do have to
yeah,
be a relative for some reason.
got it.
So you could look into to ordering that if you
Yeah.
wanted to see. I'm not even sure if a death record, like if it's a death certificate or a death registration. I'm not super familiar with Oklahoma records. And so if it's a registration, it might list the cause of death. But if it's just like a death certificate, it might not even give any information. And it was like $30. So I'm not sure if
No, you don't need to
if
do
that's
any
worth.
of that.
Well, no, yeah, I,
And I
I
bet
was
someone
going
may
to, but then
even
I'm
know
like, oh, it's
that,
not
Like, I wonder if that's, as you grow up, like they may know family
Mhm.
stories that they don't really tell you. Like when my
Exactly
uncle
right.
told about Fred Barnes, he didn't tell us the rape part. That was just
Mhm.
more something like we talked amongst ourselves as adults about, like, because,
Right.
there's lots of kids in the room. So
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
they know.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's something worth asking.
Hmm.
Yeah, so she passed away in 1918. I thought it was interesting. Here is her husband's World War I draft registration card. And there's a couple interesting things. So first of all, his birthday was September 13th, and Lucy died the day after his birthday on September
Mm.
14th.
Hmm.
And then this date of registration for his draft registration is September 12th, 1918. So this is just 2 days before his wife's death. I'm not sure if that's related at all. I don't know if he's away. I don't know. But I just thought
Huh.
that was especially curious, especially
Huh.
because on that newspaper notice, it said that she died on the 13th. So I was like, oh, that's like her husband's birthday. But then on the death index, it says the 14th. So I'm not sure which one's right, but
Yeah.
I thought that was a little interesting. Anyways, so here's Susie, a picture of Susie and her half brother, Wiley. Susie would have been 14 years old when her mother passed away, and Wiley would have been 8 years old when his mother passed away. I'm not sure if you can read this. This is a memory that was added to her profile on Family Search. Do you think you
Yes.
could read that paragraph?
Yes. And sorry for all my papers. I'm trying to
You're fine. I
still
will
take
send this
notes
all
because I'm
to you.
like,
So
oh my gosh, I have to keep track of this all. Okay. All right. So, okay, this is my uncle who has been trying to
Oh,
figure
okay.
out a lot of the stuff out. So great
Okay.
grandma Lucy lived a short yet difficult life. Though we know a few details, my grandmother Sue was born out of wedlock, father reportedly Fred Barnes. Grandma Manning never liked the way her stepfather, Robert E. Fish, treated her mother. And I was going to say that's something like I did
Mhm.
know that too. When great grandma Lucy died at the young age of 32, my 14-year-old grandma went to live with her grandma and grandpa Eyman in Texas.
Okay. Yeah. So learning
Hmm.
all about this about Lucy and about Susie, what do you think Susie's childhood might have been like?
Oh, not good.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty traumatic, honestly. You know, they talked about how my grandma, so Sue's daughter, my
Hmm.
dad's mom, she was the only child, but her parents were just like, I guess maybe other generation, but they would go dancing for hours and hours, and my grandma would just be in a car, outside playing and by herself in the car,
Hmm.
and so she had a really different childhood. I wouldn't say like abusive or anything, but it's like she was
Right.
raised by parents who didn't really have much of a childhood themselves.
Right.
So they just didn't
Maybe didn't know how.
they just didn't know. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
So that would make sense. Like that's what Lucy probably did not have a good childhood, you know?
Yeah. And I'm sure losing her mother when she's 14,
Mm-hmm.
feeling maybe unwanted by her stepfather, like
Yeah.
that.
And maybe there's some connection about how her stepfather treated her mom
Yeah.
that led to her
Right.
breakdown and death.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of things
A
that
lot of
you're like,
trauma.
I wish I knew
Yeah.
what happened, you know? Yeah. So, like that paragraph said, by 1920, Susie was living with her grandparents. So, here's the 1920 census. Gustav Eymann and Rose and Charles. So, Lucy's brother, Charles, was living
Uh-huh.
there, and her sister, Amelia, was living there, and Walter. So, her three siblings were still living with their
Wow.
parents. And
Mm-hmm.
then here's Susie, is listed as niece, but we know that that's not right. She
Yeah.
was,
A granddaughter.
their granddaughter.
Mm.
They lived in Roberts County, Texas. Also in the household is Charles, and he's listed as divorced. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And this is that same Charles that then later wrote that document saying that Fred Barnes was Susie's father. So Roberts County, Texas was close to the border with Beaver County, Oklahoma, where Lucy and Robert Fish lived. So it's just across the border to Texas. I'm not sure exactly how far apart their farms would have been, but Susie didn't have to move too far to live with her grandparents after her mother's death. And then here's Susie's obituary. So it kind of just gives a good summary of her life to show how she ended up in Utah. This is a marriage photo of Susie and her husband, Frederick Alphen Manning. Susie was 23 when they got married, and Frederick was 25. But here on this obituary, I'll just read some of it. So Susie Eyman Manning, 97, beloved mother and grandfather, passed away September 2001 in Tremont. This is in Utah. Says that Sue was born August 30th, 1904, in Gage, Oklahoma, and after the death of her mother, she moved to Miami, Texas, where she lived with her grandparents. At the age of 18, the family relocated to Tremont, where she was employed in the family business. And then on December 6, 1927, she married her sweetheart, Frederick Alfred Manning, in Brigham City. So sounds like she wasn't super settled in any place throughout her childhood. She went and lived with her grandparents by the age of 14, and then they went up to Utah 4 years later. But she's a beautiful woman, and I'm sure her life was not ideal being raised, with her mother in a marriage that probably was not the greatest and not the best environment to be raised in. But that is what I have to share with you.
That's so impressive. I think like that's the
Yeah.
word I just keep thinking and saying about this whole experience.
So Susie's life was not great. Would you, I guess you did consider, as my question was, would you have considered any of her experiences traumatic? And I think we would. I
Oh,
think
absolutely.
obviously her mother's death would have been traumatic. Being raised in a household with someone that I mean, we don't know exactly how that Robert Fish treated her mother, but if that got relayed to her grandson, I'm sure there was some. stuff going on, and that was not a great place. So, how do you think Susie or Lucy even would have coped with these experiences in their life? How do you think that would have affected kind of their relationships or how they dealt with people or things like that?
I just think it would have been all encompassing. I don't know how it could be
Mhm.
anything, but especially when, I mean, there's such a story there. Like if Lucy had indeed conceived her child, you know, by rape, but still refused to marry that man, I mean, she had a will.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how that gradually got trampled on or distinguished over time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure she lived in a lot of, you know, trauma, of course, but even fear. And then if the man she trusted after was not trustworthy and didn't treat her
Right.
well, I can just see how that will to assert
Mm-hmm.
herself and to fight could just be just slowly dismantled year by
Mm-hmm.
year. And so I was thinking, like, that's 12 years she was married to him.
Mm-hmm.
That had to have been an awful 12 years. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So I feel like how would she I think yeah, how would she have coped with it? It seems like she didn't, but I also think like what other choice
Mm-hmm.
did she have? Like
Yeah.
she didn't have another choice. She tried to assert her choice in another way and you know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that led to a lot of just practical struggles of being able to like feed and care for her child and maybe that
Mm-hmm.
made her want to get married with someone, you know, so
Right.
seems
Yeah.
like she didn't have much of a choice. So I really sympathize with whatever happened, however
Mm-hmm.
she died. And I'm wanting
Yeah.
to call my uncle next and find out more about what that means, the breakdown.
Right.
And then yeah, my grandma, I wasn't super close with my great grandma,
Mm-hmm.
but I know my grandma and my grandpa took really good care of her. And she lived in a tiny house down the street, but it was full of really nice things.
Mm-hmm.
And we were watching some videos of her and my great grandpa, and it just seemed like they had a really teasing, fun relationship. So I'm sure Sue struggled to know how to mother well because it
Mm-hmm.
seems like she probably didn't have that kind of involved mom,
Yeah.
but but it seems like she did the best she could too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she did
Yeah.
well enough that her daughter took really good care of her as she was
Yeah.
aging.
Hmm.
So it probably wasn't all that bad. It was probably like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't leave a child in a car for hours at a
Yeah.
time, but maybe I'm still a really good mom. I don't
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Oh, cool.
or good enough.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, you know, she must have been she wasn't like a warm person. I think my only real memory of her is getting to have a sleepover with her and her making me turn off the television at 7 p.m. in the middle of a movie I was really
Oh
wanting
no.
to see the end of. And then getting, you know, she's getting us set up in her bed. And I ended up having to call my grandma, her daughter, because I knew my great grandma was going to die while I was sleeping in the bed with her.
Oh no.
And she just wasn't a very warm person.
Yes.
But
Oh,
I know other
interesting.
siblings were closer to her and they
Mm-hmm.
probably connected with her personality of kind of just being a I don't know. She was always cute with the little kids, but she was
Mm-hmm.
pretty by the book about some things. So and yeah, like bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh,
so
interesting.
I don't know. I can see how that would all play out based off of her history, and it still speaks to maybe her own perseverance and
Mm-hmm.
you know willingness to
I
move
think
forward.
that's, yeah, I think that's really neat that that she lived long enough for you to meet her, Susie, to kind
Yeah.
of, understand maybe a little bit about her. But so thinking about both Lucy and Susie, wondering if you have any thoughts about how you hope to honor them and hope to live your life in a way that would make them proud.
hmm ever since we had our conversation a while back when we were talking about like who would I want to learn more about, and I was like, I actually do want to know more about that. I've been thinking about Lucy a lot.
Mm.
And I don't know. I think like I still want to know more, of course, but she's been on my mind a lot. And I've been also thinking about my grandma and maybe be more curious about her because she was just grandma, just sitting in always at a couch and just like smiling at us kids. But not someone I was gonna go and sit on her lap. Like she was intimidating to me, right? But she
Hmm.
was, just grandma. So I think the way I would like to honor them, learning more about them makes me want to know even more. So just
Hmm.
honor them by learning even more about them, trying
Yep.
to understand them better. Also, it makes me want to do things a little differently, like maybe write in my journal more.
Hmm.
So my kids don't have to try to fill in the gaps all the time. But I think more than anything, I just keep going back to Lucy.
Hmm.
Like I just feel like that's a woman who didn't have much of a choice,
Hmm.
like in any part of her life, besides that one time we don't totally know, but it seems like she
Right.
asserted herself. So like I feel like what I can do is be grateful that I have them
Yeah.
and use my choices wisely. And also
Hmm.
kind of goes back to what you're saying about women being so small. Oh, that's connecting. So I feel like, okay, this is just not going to be a long diatribe here, but one of the insecurities I've had my whole life is feeling like people want me to shut up, to like just sit down, shut up, be quiet. We don't want to
Hmm.
hear from you. Be small. And I've got that messaging a lot. And even from people who like don't like my intro to the podcast, have weird criticisms of things
Yeah.
like that. Or when you say something about what you think, or, you get that message. And it seems like the world pushes against you that way. Like you can't succeed. You're just like this person, like this woman,
Yeah.
like you don't get to succeed. Not you, everyone else, not you. Anyway, it makes me think like put on your pioneer panties, Monica, and just keep speaking up
Yeah.
and keep asserting your choices in ways that are so good. Like these are good choices. So
Mhm.
keep asserting them and do it in ways that she couldn't.
Wow. Got chills. Yeah. No, I think that's almost the best way that we can honor our female ancestors, like by doing those things that they couldn't,
Hmm.
by doing those good things that are bringing about change, that are bringing about, empowerment to other women is is like the perfect way to honor them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it edifies. A couple years ago, I was challenged to like come up with a bigger mission for my work. And I
Mm.
like went really big. And it was, change the world by changing women. But it's not, changing them, it's helping them be who they really are.
Yeah.
So that just really um buoys that up for me.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Monica, I've loved sharing this with you and I've loved
So
learning about these
special.
ancestors. Yeah, there's even one little clue that I like want to dive into more. And the next episode after this week is going to be a behind the scenes of researching
Ooh,
your family. And I think I'm going to try to dig in a little bit to this other clue, which maybe
okay.
I'll get a little teaser. So that Robert Fish, I was trying to find census records of him. So this is the husband of Lucy. When he was 5, he was living in a household with his mother, who had remarried someone with the last name Barnes. And I'm
What?
like, what? So I was trying to find any sort of relations to either of those two Fred Barnes I
Yeah.
was fine, but I couldn't see one. So I'm gonna dig into that some more, see if I can find anything out. But maybe if you hear back from your uncle and any clues
Yeah.
there,
I'll
let me
pass them
know
on to
and
you.
we'll see if we can figure anything else out.
And also why the need to say who the father was later. Like why was that
Right.
end up
I
like put
almost think
on
it could have
paper?
been maybe for legal records or
It had
something.
to have
I'm
been.
not sure. Maybe with her birth record, it does say Barnes on her birth record, which is another record I tried to get, but the same kind of issue. But so it could have
Mm,
been something with that. But anyways,
okay.
still more things to uncover. And like,
Amazing. I love
but
it.
it
I love it
was
so
so much
much.
fun. Yeah, no, it was
Thank you
really
for
cool.
all the time you put into this and
Yeah,
the
no, it
gifts you're
was fun.
using.
Yeah. So maybe can you share with us share about where people can find you if
Oh
they want to sign
yeah.
up
Oh
for
my
your
God.
sticky habits
Yeah, I'm like, do we
intensive?
need to do any of this now? I mean, we should just all become genealogists. Yeah, so they can listen to my podcast about progress and find me on Instagram by the same name about progress. I'd love that. But Megan, they need to just do everything you're doing. So
Yeah.
I'm just so amazed by
Uh,
you. It's
yeah, no,
really a special
it
thing.
was a lot
Thank
of
you.
fun. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Monica.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the podcast today. If you could leave a rating and review, that would be great. This is how people can find the podcast and get more people to listen and to understand the power of knowing their ancestors. If you want to learn how to do this yourself, how to build your family tree, or how to learn the stories of your ancestors, you can go to knowyouраncestors.co to find my 2 courses that are available to purchase. Know Your Family Tree takes you through understanding how to build your family tree and how to research it. This is the basis for how you can find information and stories about your ancestors. And then my more in-depth course, Know Your Ancestor, where you can learn how to look at records differently, how to find those pieces of information that tell your ancestor's story, to consider what trauma they might have experienced, what resilience they had in face of their challenges, and can help you really understand yourself in the process. So you can go check out both of those courses on my website, knowyouраncestors.co.